Hey, good morning, everyone. I hope you have your cup of coffee this morning. I brought mine over. I brewed up some Starbucks Komodo Dragon, another dark roast coffee that I like, ground it this morning and brewed it up and enjoying my cup here mid-morning on a Tuesday. I wanted to spend these few minutes with you as we have a habit of doing every week. And today I want to read from this devotional. It's a rather classic work by Oswald Chambers, My Utmost for His Highest. Some of you may be familiar with this. Some of you may actually use this. I have this copy of this devotional. You can also read it online. And today's devotional really jumped out at me. And so I thought I'd share some of my thoughts based upon the July 28th entry in this My Utmost for His Highest. Every day's devotional has a scripture passage that goes with it. And today's passage is in Mark chapter 6, verses 45 through 52. I won't read it for you, but I bet you know the story. I bet you know this episode in the life of Jesus. It's the moment where Jesus walks on water, a pretty well-known miracle of Jesus. Mark accounts to us that what happens just before is Jesus had fed the 5,000, another miracle, a miracle recorded in all four of the Gospels, the feeding of the 5,000. That's significant. It was in their memories of the gospel writers. And on the heels of that, Jesus sends his disciples on ahead. They get in a boat and go out on the Sea of Galilee, and they go on ahead. And as night falls, Jesus is going to make his way to them as only Jesus can by walking on the water. There's a bit of a storm that arises on the water. The disciples are there in the boat with the rows fighting against the wind and the waves. When they see kind of off in the distance this apparition, this shadowy figure that they think is a ghost, they kind of get panicked until they realize, and Jesus calls out to them, that it's him. And Mark says that he gets in the boat and then he even calms the sea, the wind and the waves. Mark doesn't mention it specifically, but other accounts we know that as part of this, Peter even is invited to walk on water, and he steps out of the boat and he takes a few steps just like Jesus on top of the water until he begins to sink, and then Jesus grabs him and they're in the boat, and the story ends with that. It's really a remarkable story. It's a miraculous moment in the life of Jesus, a pretty memorable scene that we have here. And Oswald Chambers uses that scene to kind of ask some questions, to kind of make a point that I think is worth considering this morning. This is how he begins his devotional for July 28th. He says this: "We are apt to imagine that if Jesus Christ constrains us and we obey him, he will lead us to great success. We must never put our dreams of success as God's purpose for us. His purpose may be exactly the opposite." Now, when you start that way, you've got my attention, because when I think about what it means to follow Christ, when I think about if I'm going to give my life to Christ, if I'm going to try to live my life in obedience to Christ, I would hope there would be successes. I would hope there would be moments that must have felt like success for these disciples when Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 small loaves and 2 fish. And they had 12 basketfuls to collect at the end. I mean, that would feel like a pretty momentous moment in your life. And you might have this sense that following Jesus is going to be victory after victory, miracle after miracle, joy after joy. And Oswald Chambers makes the point that's not always what God intends for us. In fact, he uses this particular episode where the disciples are struggling on the water, where there's a bit of a storm that's come up, and where they're having to really work to try to make progress in their life, to show that sometimes this great success off in the distance isn't what God's about. Listen to how he goes on. He says, his purpose, meaning God's purpose, is that I depend on him and on his power now. If I can stay in the middle of the turmoil, calm and unperplexed, that is the end of the purpose of God. His end is the process, that I see him walking on the waves, no shore in sight, no success, no goal. And listen to this, just the absolute certainty that it is all right because I see him walking on the sea. What an interesting concept he points out there. That in the midst of the difficulty of that moment, in the midst of the struggle that we might equate with the day-to-day struggle of our lives, that for God it's the process that is as important as the end. It's the process of his character being formed in us, so that even in the midst of difficulty, even in the midst of struggle, even in the times when things aren't going like we hoped, as Chambers says, we can stay calm and unperplexed, that we can have the absolute certainty that all is right because we see Jesus, in this case, walking on the sea. I think about where we exist, where we are in this point in time with our lives. All of us are experiencing these circumstances, probably a little differently, but I think it goes without saying that all of us have been greatly affected by the realities, the new realities we're facing in regard to this point in time in history, with a global pandemic, with the economic issues that have gone with it. It just seems like, there are things that, as you and I realize, that we know, I'm sure you do as well, more and more people who are dealing with the realities of the difficulty of this time, whether it's from personally having someone they know or related to testing positive and dealing with those difficulties and realities. We have a few people in our church that's the case for them, and you probably know people beyond our church that's the case for them. Whether it's the case that, given what's happened economically with different businesses closing in a tourist town and a tourist area like we are, and the whole Keys, the main road in and out, being closed, and all the hotels being closed for a while, what realities, kind of the ripple effect that has on the hospitality industry, on the fishing industry, on any tourist related business, how that trickles down, then what that does in our economy. These are tough times, and we could feel like, much like these disciples must have felt as they're out here on this lake, and they're working hard. They're straining, Mark says, verse 48. His disciples are straining at the oars because the wind was against them. It might feel like right now in life, the wind is against you. A lot is against you. But Chambers makes the great point. Can we, with calmness and without being perplexed, know that God is there, and he's able, even in the midst of the turmoil all around us, just to take a leisurely stroll on top of the waves to remind us that he is with us. In fact, he ends today's devotional, by saying this: God's end is to enable me to see that he can walk on the chaos of my life just now. If we have a further end in view, we do not pay enough attention to the immediate present. If we realize that obedience is the end, and then he closes this way, then each moment as it comes is precious. There are probably some things right now that you wouldn't qualify or classify as precious. But I think what he says here is if we keep looking out there, we keep waiting. We hear about, even people are thinking, and I've thought, boy, I wish things would just go back to normal. We're looking for something else. We're looking for a change. We're looking for the difficulty we're experiencing to sort of calm down so we can get on with what our plans and our goals are for our life. And at times what we need to do is to see that God can walk on the chaos that is our life, even in these times, that he can walk on the waters of that. And if we miss what he might want to do right now, in the midst of chaos, what he is doing right now in the midst of chaos, then ultimately we're going to miss what could be these precious moments, these remarkable moments. These disciples probably on that water had no idea that what they were about to witness, as they were just struggling with all their might against those oars, would be a moment in history that we 2,000 years later still talk about and can still learn from. How much could our experience right now, even in the difficulty, and I know that word means a lot of things and means different things to each of us depending on what we're dealing with right now. But is it possible that we could see Jesus walking on and above the chaos of our life, and find in the midst of that chaos the calmness and the tranquility of knowing that even in this time where we don't know what's next, when we're not sure what is the end of this particular situation, that God is still very much there, and He'll meet us in it, and He'll see us through it. And one day He'll, just like He did for those disciples, speak a little calmness to the waves that we're bumping around on, and we can look back and know that He has been with us the whole time. I really appreciate this devotional, My Utmost for His Highest. I don't always read it. I don't read it every day, but regularly I pick it up, and I thought today's ideas, today's thoughts were particularly appropriate given the realities we've been facing for these last several months and what looks like in the weeks and months ahead of us as we deal with this. So thanks for joining me for these few minutes to reflect on that. Hey, listen, a couple of quick things. Number one, just want to let you know there will be no Coffee with PC on Friday. That's because Denise and I are going to get out of town for just a few days, just a short trip to get out and kind of decompress. As we talk about it, as a lot of us have been kind of around the same few places, not doing much. We want to find 4 new walls to stare at, as it will be. No, but we're just going to go away. We're just going to find a few minutes, a quiet place, rented a house near a beach for a few days just to kind of get away and decompress. So I won't be doing this on Friday. I hope you'll indulge me in that break for the rest of this week. But we will be back for the weekend. Sunday, we'll be in service as always. Put the link to register to attend. Not required, but helpful if you just click that link to let us know if you're planning to come in person to our service. And then, of course, we'll have our service streamed online like we have been throughout these times. And actually, even before that, we hope you're able to join us in one of those 2 ways. And ultimately, I hope this week, whatever the situation, even the turmoil it may feel like, when the wind is against you, that you'll realize that somewhere out there, Jesus is able to stroll right across the top of it. When we feel almost overwhelmed, Jesus is the source of calm in the midst of our storm. So take comfort in the God who is with you and for you, even in these days. And we will touch base with you. I guess we'll see you Sunday morning during our worship service. Take care. Have a great week.